This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. And today I have a guest that I've aired clips of his interviews on this channel with George Knapp and Colin Kelleher, as well as some other interviews. So I really appreciate him sharing that from his Engaging the Phenomenon podcast. He's also an experiencer in some ways, which we are going to get into. And the other interview was with Jim Semivan. His name slipped my head for a second. James Iandoli, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I appreciate that you took some of the clips and even that interview with Jim Semivan and some clips from the Lou Elizondo discussion to help spread better awareness to those interviews. Because I don't know how, your audience per se, but in the UFO community, they got pretty good traction. They were, I think, pretty good for their time.
Yeah, and this is there's some crossover for sure, but there's a lot of wrestling fans and MMA fans that don't necessarily follow UFO videos that might just catch the info here and there. So there's some great information in those. So it's good that we're getting the word out about some of the contents of those interviews.
Yeah, again, I appreciate that, and that's cool that people that are innocent bystanders, so to speak, are getting hit with the UFO information because it's so relevant to the time and everything that's going on right now.
Oh yeah. By the way, what's the update from you? You're right in the New York area. What's going on right now with the drones? Is that pretty much blown over, or what's the
It's,
up?
I mean, it's ongoing, right? There's still, I guess it's not being reported on as much, but it's still constant, especially New Jersey, New York, but especially in New Jersey. I think a lot of that is just people being aware of the skies for once. It's the drones have been around and there is increased drone activity, but uh, you know, it is what it is. I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on that as regards to the current activity, but uh, I don't. I I understand why people are excited about it, and there's a lot of hype, but I think a lot of it is conventional, or at least a conventional human technology.
Yeah, I was talking to James Fox, the producer, earlier today, and he was saying that there might be 20% of truly unknowns up there, and other people like Tim Burchett have said even less, something like 2% unknown. So, do you think those could be black ops, or do you think those could be legitimate, either extraterrestrial or crypto terrestrial vehicles or illusions?
I think the majority of it is conventional, and when I say conventional, I'm also including black ops and military technology, surveillance technology, even foreign adversarial technology as well. I mean, they just did a video kind of release of Chinese drone swarms, and it's amazing, right? You look at it, and it's like, how do you determine anymore what a real bona fide UFO is nowadays? Compared to in the 1970s, you see something moving in the sky a little weird. It's like, wow, we can't do that. Well, I think uh, part of the disclosure that's going on right now, the UAP transparency effort, and what OSAP and ATIP, uh, one of the big functions that I think that they were trying to do is identify the true anomalies, because I think one of the biggest problems and why they're pushing for disclosure so much now is because we most certainly have, but other countries are starting to crack the UAP technology. And it's become such a problem that we can't tell the difference and we can't inform our own personnel. And it's becoming very troublesome.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk at one point that those were Chinese, even by some credible people. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't doubt that's part of it. I also, and they don't want to panic people, but that's why there's still the air of, oh, it's an anomaly. They know when it's an anomaly and it's not to the extent. I mean, again, part of the problem is that people on the ground, meaning like the first responders, Local authorities, they don't. They're not read into black programs, so they don't know. But once it gets kicked up the chain, they'll know if it's ours or not, or if it's foreign, or if it's a true anomaly. But again, Hal Puthoff, one of the chief scientists for OSAP and ATIP, said the biggest threat for UAP and the reason that they were pushing the OSAP and ATIP programs were, the biggest threat from UAP isn't that there's some kind of imminent non-human intelligence attack and invasion, although they keep the threat idea open because of intent and capability, which they're trying to, discover really. But the biggest threat posed by UFOs is that another country is gonna crack the technology first.
Yeah, and that may have happened already, right?
I think we're seeing parts of that now, and that's the real push for UAP transparency, is because it's getting so hard to tell the difference.
Now, I've noticed in your interviews, and I've probably seen at least 20 of them at this point on your Engaging the Phenomenon podcast, you're very scientific. What is your background to know all that stuff? Do you just read a lot of books, or are you deeply educated?
I'm self-learned, so I'm not a scientist by any means, not even by training. I appreciate the scientific method, but I also understand its own flaws, and even, I guess you can say, the flaws of the materialistic paradigm. So I just have done a lot of research over many years. I mean, for somebody, I'm not too old. I'm 37, but for somebody my age, I've been involved in the UFO field for a very long time.
Yeah, and you got into it at a good time because a lot of these people that you have done interviews with on your podcast are now considered celebrities, and you were able to get them before they went to that next level.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, I'm gonna have Lou back on. Uh, where I'm talking to him about that, so I'm really looking forward to that. I hope we can do a very in-depth interview because his book Imminent, which became a New York Times bestseller. And for people listening, Lou Elizondo was the director of the ATIP program, or people are kind of debating what the correct terminology is, or whatever. But as far as we know, the ATIP program, he was the point man. We can at least say that.
Yes, and that was a very good interview as well. He gets a lot of heat, and you even got him squirming a little bit. He even admitted that he was squirming, which I thought was hilarious, considering his military background. Do you think that heat is merited by some of the people that say, well, he still has all of his security clearances, he's only saying what they're allowing him to say, and this could be some type of operation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question, and I don't think it's so simple. Like, of course, he has to go through the DOPSR review process before he says anything legally. If he does overstep his boundaries, he could be in a lot of trouble in different ways. So he does have to toe the line and be creative in how he can respond. As far as if it's a psyop, I mean, people hear psyop and they automatically think, "Wow, that's a terrible thing," or "It's against the people." And I, things aren't so black and white, right? So let's say that there's a psyop to condition the public to this and to open the public to the idea that UAPs are real and non-human intelligence is real. I wouldn't necessarily see that as a negative psyop, right? But people don't like that there's control around it. However, it's inevitable that if the U.S. government is going to, in different ways, release this information, there's no way they're going to do it like wildly, right? They're going to do it in a way where they feel they can influence and control it. I mean, it would not be in their benefit, so to speak, to just put it out there like that. So I understand if that was the intention, why would you expect them to do it any other way? So the best we can do is be cognizant of that possibility and move forward from that point. Okay, consider Lou Elizondo or Jay Stratton or anybody that is has the former background, right? Christopher Mellon, if they're going to speak publicly on UAP, they're only going to say what they can say, and that's it. So we have to expect that. That's reasonable. If I was one of them, I don't think I'd put my life on the line and say something that is going to compromise my safety and my family's safety for something that when I even say it, people aren't going to believe it anyways. They're going to say, oh, well, he's just saying that. Right.
That is true. One thing that you got him going on during that podcast was when you were talking about CE5 and Dr. Stephen Greer, who I've been on the fence about, but I will get into your own experience doing the CE5 in a bit. But could you just talk about the controversy of Stephen Greer and why maybe some people don't like him, and why I can tell by your podcasts you still hold him in pretty good regard?
So that is a very complex and nuanced conversation. Honestly, that's its own 2-3 hour conversation. No, I'm not even exaggerating. So just for people watching and listening, Dr. Stephen Greer was the founder of the Disclosure Project and what came to be known as the CE5 Initiative. The Disclosure Project was something that culminated in May 9th, 2001, Washington Press Club Conference, where I think at that presentation, there were 12 whistleblowers that had firsthand experience that were exposed to the UFO program, who were people who were military contractors or intelligence officers. And they, in some way, shape, or form during their service, had encountered the UFO subject, whether it be the reporting of UFOs, seeing an actual UFO themselves, witnessing people hiding it from the government, and all kind of things like that. So we wouldn't be where we are today. There would be no ATIP probably, or OSAP, or To the Stars, if it wasn't for the early work that Dr. Stephen Greer did. And, Dr. Stephen Greer early on had a lot of support from really deep insiders. He had Dr. Edgar Mitchell on side, the sixth man to walk on the moon. He had a military advisor, Commander Will Miller, who was a Navy commander, who was somebody who was actually in, and he can't really say this himself too forwardly, but the guy ran an unacknowledged special access program. Dr. Stephen Greer was talking about unacknowledged special access programs in 92, 93, in the 90s, right? The only person who really took note of that has in the history of UFOs prominently had been Richard Dolan, who reported it in his books, UFOs in the National Security State. But other than that, we did not hear that term until Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, and these people started coming forward in 2017, so 30 years later almost. And that is where these programs reside pretty much. They've gotten the new kind of label legacy programs. That's what they call them within the intelligence community and whatnot. But again, for his time, Dr. Stephen Greer was a pioneer, trailblazer. He also is a highly controversial individual. He's burned every bridge he's touched. So on a personality level, he's very troublesome. So that's a real deal. But also you have to understand when he was doing what he was doing. So Dr. Stephen Greer got a briefing. He sat down with the sitting CIA, not former, the sitting CIA director for Clinton. And there's a paper trail which talks about how they're setting this meeting up. And John Peterson of the Arlington Institute is the one who set that up. So he got meetings with the J2, Admiral Tom Wilson, which is very important because the Admiral Tom Wilson, Eric Davis notes. I can go on and on about he got a meeting with the sitting DIA director, Patrick Hughes, in 98. The guy, so when you hear him say that he had a meeting with such and such, it happened. He has his own. So when you listen to Stephen Greer, you have to understand you're listening to Stephen Greer. So he won't flat out lie per se, but he has his spin on it, right? Which is his perspective of what happened. And so you have to see that there's areas of gray there. But if he says that he had a meeting with such and such or so and so, that more than likely that actually had happened. So it's a nuanced conversation. It's not black and white. He strayed very far from the work that he had once done. He's kind of off the deep end. He's brought forward a lot of unvetted or unverifiable whistleblowers where their testimonies not even too important or confusing. But you got to understand, right, that this guy was a civilian in the 1990s when this was not safe to do. It literally was not safe to do. I mean, you heard what happened to David Grush and all these people, even Lou Elizondo. There's retaliation. This dude was a civilian in the 90s doing it when it wasn't not cool to do it. And he definitely got mixed up with some people. And there's a term called targeted individuals. This dude was no doubt put on some kind of list for surveillance and being a targeted individual. So again, that literally that's like a whole podcast within itself to try to break down. But listen to everything he says, listen with a grain of salt, compare it to other information, because you'll hear people like Lou or Jim or anybody. I'm not, and I'm not just trying to single them out. I'm just saying there's people in the invisible college, Jacques Vallée and whatever, and Hal Puthoff. And guess what? They all hate him. And for a ton of reasons, there's an adversarial component.
He made up some stuff about Puthoff too, didn't he, at one point?
Yes, right. So that again, that's a very complicated situation. And I'm not going to say that he made that up. He heard that somewhere. So you have to understand where he heard that from. And it's not for me to speak about, but there's probably more to that story than people understand. And that's getting beyond what I really can publicly discuss.
And as far as what Lou has been saying about Stephen, like orchestrating flares being dropped and so forth for CE5, I know you've had some legitimate CE5 experiences, and you're not saying that it can happen only with Greer, I guess, where Greer is kind of more about the money side of it, I guess. Maybe you
Nowadays
could
he is.
explain the
Yeah.
difference.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, man. Each one of these questions is like a whole podcast, seriously. And I've been out with Dr. Stephen Greer for those events, and I can tell you, as somebody who has experienced genuine anomalous contact experiences before and after those events, at least the ones I went to, were the real deal. And what most people don't realize nowadays, people might hear the name Christopher Bledsoe. He's this famous experiencer now, and he's been put on a pedestal in some way because the intelligence community has backed them and he's cooperated with them. Okay. And because of that cooperation, he has their support and validation. What people don't realize is Dr. Stephen Greer was the Christopher Bledsoe of the 90s. Okay. There were intelligence people coming to his events and validating and verifying and all this. But Dr. Stephen Greer was not playing nice. Dr. Greer was basically like, F all you people. I'm going to do what I believe and how I think it should be done. And, for better or worse, right? Maybe if he cooperated, it would have gotten us further or it would have kept him on a better track. I don't know. I kind of think like things happen the way they should have. But when it comes to CE5, yeah, that flare thing, it's a highly questionable thing. The video that Greer shows, those are flares. There's no question in my mind. They appear and disappear and float in the wind. They behave in every action that a flare. Now, did he orchestrate that? Could be, right? Could he be at desperate times and he did that? Could be. I really don't know, but in the early 90s, and you can speak to, there's dozens and dozens and dozens, there's probably hundreds of witnesses at the very least. I mean, a lot of them have passed away by now, but there's definitely many that I'm in contact with who will tell you in the 1990s, Dr. Stephen Greer was a UFO magnet. He seems to have lost his touch in that sense, maybe because he lost his way. I don't know. But just like Christopher Bledsoe is having all this anomalous phenomena around him, and many others who don't talk about it, that Dr. Stephen Greer really was the real deal in that CE5 regard. And I like that Stephen Greer created a structured way to look at contact with non-human intelligence. And the structure of it is kind of, it's a fail-safe way. So CE5 is not limited to Stephen Greer CE5 protocols, but the CE5 protocols do work to anybody who's like genuinely putting in the time and effort to do it. However, there's what we call CE5, or intentional contact with non-human intelligence, has been going on for thousands of years. As far back as you go into human history, basically every major religion that you can look at has stories about humans interacting with non-human intelligence. So interactions with non-human intelligence is a very human thing. It's a very human capability. It's not limited to one method. Anybody can do it who's sincere. There's going to be people that it's harder for. There's going to be people that just have a knack for it, and they're naturals for whatever reason. Just like anybody could be a natural at basketball or wrestling or whatever. And some people just like, they're not really built that way, you know? Just like I'm not built for whatever certain things, you know, I'm not an engineer. I can't build things and put them together. But when it comes to things like CE5, like, yeah, I could do that. It comes kind of natural to me.
And can you explain to us what your C5 experiences were, and are all of your phenomenon-related experiences directly related to CE5, or have some of them been outside of that?
So many of my first experiences were outside of that, which means I didn't go out intentionally seeking contact. It's something that just happened to me, just like it happens to many people that we call in the community, we call them experiencers. You know, there's also abductees, which I'm not. I did not ever experience an abduction as far as I know. So, I mean, I was having not just contact with non-human intelligence from a young age, but I was also having things like out-of-body experiences, like precognitive dreams, just lucid dreaming. You know, for whatever reason, I was just cognizant of those kind of events occurring, and I was always fascinated by them. You know, when I was younger, I had entities in my room, and it was highly telepathic. And speaking of telepathy, I'm just going to drop a shout out to the telepathy tapes here, because the telepathy tapes is a podcast where they're basically proving telepathy has nothing to do so far necessarily directly with non-human intelligence, but if you get the gist of what they're saying, it absolutely does. It's the bigger picture. It's the more important thing of this whole thing. But
yeah, and there's some good videos by that podcast out there. I still have to listen to the full podcast, but it involves how people with autism communicate telepathically.
It's the best evidence that I've ever seen for telepathy, or what we call psychic phenomenon. And also Jesse Michaels of American Alchemy did a great 2.5 hour like documentary on it, and that's a great primer. But definitely check out the podcast. But in my own experience, I had experiences with what you can call non-human intelligence. But what's important, and you know, is that, you know, it's the non-human intelligence and the UFO thing is like, wow, it's going to blow your mind. It's going to be a paradigm shift. But it's not always just like, wow, I saw this object in the sky. It often involves like precognition, telepathy. And when you have an encounter, sometimes it's like your consciousness merges with the non-human intelligence, even in if you want to say a superficial way. Like it's visceral, right? Like you feel it, and it's incredible. It's amazing. And I mean, you're never going to be the same after that. And, you know, when you have an experience like that, you realize that is just the beginning. It just shows you that there's so much more. And that's like a kind of nod also to Dr. John Mack, who was the Harvard scientist studying experiencers. I think he dubbed the term experiencer and abductions, where he was saying, like, having a contact experience is like your passport to the cosmos. It's like the gateway drug to seeing like the vast, infinite, multi-dimensional reality, and within that, all the unity of everything as well. It's a complete paradigm shift. So I've had experiences that are in your face. And one of my, again, it's hard for me to kind of summarize all those experiences, because there's some of them, they were all connected. There was 3 in particular that were very connected to each other. So I don't know if you want me to explain some of those, because that would take a little bit of time, but I could try to summarize it if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely, because I've heard you mention them a bunch of times, but never really dive into them, which
Oh,
I'm sure
no.
you have, but I just haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, I have. So I'm going to try to summarize this as best I can due to our limited time. So again, I had like maybe half a dozen encounters when I was younger of non-human intelligence, kind of almost shadow type entities in my room that were highly, highly, highly telepathic. And it was really, at that age, it was frightening. It was never harmful. I was never harmed. I was never taken. I was never kind of hurt in any way, but it was alarming. But I guess that in part opened me up. The first thing that I heard when I saw these entities was, he can see us. And it like shook me to the core, basically, because I didn't know what was going on. And at that time, I did not associate with the UFO phenomenon. And to this day, I can't say necessarily that those entities were associated with UFOs. In the greater picture, and after everything's said and done, I now wonder that, and which I'll explain why. So those happened. And also when I was younger, there was many times when I'd go outside and I would see strange lights in the sky, and I would take like one of those like little disposable cameras and try to take pictures of them. And, at that age, I was too young to just determine, like satellite, plane, meteor, really, in the sense where, to me, when I was younger, they seemed anomalous, but, thinking back, I didn't have the determination skill set to really say, well, that's a bona fide UFO. But that's kind of a side note of that did occur. And it kind of reflects what I have seen in CE5, actually, many years later. So jumping forward, when I was 20 years old in 2007, in that time, I'd been having some sporadic anomalous experiences, like out-of-body experiences and what have you. I was already at that point, since about 18 years old, very involved in meditation, Qigong, yoga, Merkaba, just Zen, that kind of stuff. So I was already kind of on that trajectory naturally. But yeah, so when I was 20 years old, I was working this night job, and in the morning, one of the workers came up to me and when I would talk to this guy, we never talked about anything kind of strange. It was like, hey, how's your family? How's work? Kind of like we're talking about work stuff and family. That's about it. Nothing kind of strange. And out of nowhere, this guy said to me, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? And I was like, why? I'm thinking in my head, like, why would he say that to me? Right? He doesn't know any of my interests or anything like that. So I kind of brushed it off, and I said no, because I didn't hear about it. And I finished that shift, and it was the early morning. I went home and I went to sleep, probably 8:30 in the morning or 9 a.m., what have you. And when I went to sleep, I had this crazy, it was like a vivid, lucid UFO dream where I am in the dream and I'm driving down one of my old blocks in my old neighborhood. And there's an orange, like electric plasma UFO right above my car. And I can feel the electrical pulses from it. And again, this is in a dream, and I'm trying to get away from it. And I'm driving, and this goes on for maybe like 2.5 minutes in this dream, and I can never escape it. And it's pulsing. It's right above me. and I just like snap out of my dream. And by the time I wake up, it's in the afternoon now. And I'm just like waking up, coming to, like kind of that was weird kind of thing. And I'm just waking up and getting ready to, and one of my family members came into the house and they said to me, "Hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico?" And at this point I was like, screw this now. Cause it was the guy who said that to me, who would never talk about anything weird like that. Then I had this dream, and then this family member says the same thing to me about these UFOs in Mexico. And I was like, screw this. So I just go outside, and I'm thinking I'm just going to go down the street to this Chinese joint and get some chicken and broccoli and just like chill, man, because this was like just like weird. And I get in my car again. It's probably like 3:30 in the afternoon. It's broad daylight. It's late spring or early summer, and I start driving. And within 300 feet or so of driving, I just see this stationary fireball right in clear view in the sky. And I think, that's a effing UFO. And as soon as I think that, it starts to move, and it's just kind of gliding across. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm trying to chase it. And it's just this fireball, right? It almost had this kind of living quality to it. It was not like, it's really hard to explain. It was like, I don't want to say organic, but it had this living light quality to it. And it was really bizarre. And I hadn't heard about a lot of UFOs like that. And it was a sphere. And it was either really low or pretty big for where it was, because it was maybe the one third the size of a dime, like at arm's length. And I tried chasing it, and it eventually just glided out of view. It had no trail. And again, just really strange, but I was kind of really excited at this experience, because there was no question in my mind that that was a UFO. And the thing that hit me so hard was that, like, I didn't, like, I can, in my mind, I can comprehend, like, holy shit, I saw a UFO and maybe there's some kind of entities in there or whatever, right? Like, I can kind of try to rationalize that, as crazy as even that sounds, right? As strange and bizarre as that is, like, my mind can make sense of that. The thing that hit me really hard, and what is the kind of the paradigm shifter here, is the entire sequence of events that led up to that broad daylight UFO sighting, right? It wasn't just a UFO sighting. There was this entire synchronicities, high strangeness chain of events that led to that daytime encounter, which is what like made the whole thing way over the top for me. That's what really hit me, is that, again, it wasn't just this, wow, I had that, seeing a UFO is cool. Seeing a UFO in broad daylight, it's even cooler. But again, that whole chain of events, I can't, like, even now thinking about it all these years, it still like fries my brain trying to contemplate the implications of that, right? Like, what does that even mean? That all those events preceded the sighting. So I had that kind of that sequence right there. But then maybe a month, somewhere between 1 and 2 months after that, I ended up getting into this car accident, and it happened to be in the exact same location where I saw the UFO. Strangely enough, right? And this is kind of the high strangeness component to it, right? Which it's really hard to try to make sense of. So I got in this car accident, and I had this whole, I wasn't near death. So, but at the time, I thought it was a near death experience, because I'm going to explain. I thought I had literally died in this accident. It was what I now call a trauma induced out of body experience. But so I get into this accident, and again, it was in daylight. I was working all these overnight shifts, and I fell asleep driving. And as soon, I guess, all of a sudden, from this accident, I'm just, I guess you can say, I wake up in this consciousness space. if I can say that, and I'm face to face with this kind of like a light being, right? Is maybe some people would call an angel, but it was this entity of light that had this kind of little bit of a weird morphology. It had a little bit of an extended head. It had a torso, it had arms, and its body tapered down. I didn't really see legs or anything, but I was face to face with it. And this entity, the only way I can describe it is that it was not separate from me. Like I had some kind of deep knowing or knowledge that this entity and me were one, right? As crazy as that sounds. And this is a lot of the stuff that kind of gets edited from the UFO subject and edited from UFO encounters because it's inconvenient. It sounds almost religious or spiritual, but this is what happened. So, when I'm face to face with this entity, I hear this like angelic crystalline orchestra, for lack of a better description, because it sounded like heavenly, right? Like angels singing or something. And there was a perfect symphonic and incredible, right? So all of a sudden, my consciousness was like in that space, and it's really hard to describe this in a linear chronicle chain of events because of the transcendent nature of this experience. So I'm sorry, bear with me. There was like a part where I saw in like a 360 panoramic spherical view that I saw the past, the present, and the future simultaneously in this weird kind of experience. And it's even hard to say how long these things lasted. And all of a sudden from that, I'm up in the air looking down at the accident. And I'm looking down at the accident and I see the car, I see an ambulance, and I just think in my head, like, so this is it, huh? I thought I was dead, but I was awake and I was aware, but I was above the scene of the accident and I'm looking down. But when I was kind of viewing this and I said, so this is it, huh? Like I thought I was done. I was dead. And I was just like in total contentment, total equanimity, total peace, no resentment, kind of like almost a release of any stress or anything. It was beautiful. It was an incredible feeling, and I had no regrets, no remorse. It's really hard to describe. And I didn't realize this, actually, believe it or not, for years. But the point of view I had, the vantage from where I was looking down at the accident, was the exact location where I saw that fireball UFO in the sky, like to the T. That was the exact point. And I didn't realize that for years. So I don't even know what that means. But all of a sudden I wake up and, I'm in the ambulance and what have you. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm alive. And, I wasn't actually near death. I probably just suffered a concussion. And, and it ends up, the next day I get out of the hospital and I'm just like in my house, just like after that trauma induced out of body experience. And, maybe it's the effects from the car accident. I don't know. Like physically, I felt different. Like people talk about like high vibrations, and I try not to be too woo woo or new age or whatever, but like viscerally in my body, I felt like a high vibrational thing. Like literally, it was like, you can say it was a very pleasant feeling, but at the same time, I'm just like grateful to be alive, honestly. And so the following night, I'm in my room and I'm just thinking like, wow, like, even just to be here, to be alive, to experience even my mundane life is like a total freaking miracle. I could easily just not be here right now. I could have died and that's it. And that's the end of all my experience of consciousness. And here I am, like almost like I had a second chance or something. So I'm in my room cleaning, just like happy to be cleaning. Like, wow, it's amazing just to be alive. And all of a sudden I hear a voice, just not in my head, but in my body. And this is why I mentioned the telepathy tapes, because I have experienced this telepathy thing. I don't want to say many times, but a number of times directly, like a direct telepathic lock on in these cases with non-human intelligence. And I felt the voice in my body and throughout my body. And they said, come outside. But it wasn't just this voice saying, come outside. Like the second that I heard and felt this voice, it was like our consciousness melded, like our consciousness, like intertwined, connected, was almost like one kind of consciousness. And as far as I can perceive it, I felt what they were feeling and they felt what I was feeling. There was no questions. It was just like a complete two-way understanding. And again, there was a physical component to it. And while that's happening, I'm having this like Kundalini awakening experience thing. Again, visceral in my body. I can feel almost like an electricity in my body, right? Up, even up the spine and the head and the goosebumps and the electricity. But so I heard the voice and all those feelings and everything. And again, it's not just so simple of just hearing a voice. It's like a whole thing. Like I was lit up like a circuit board. And they said, come outside. So I automatically know what's going to happen, right? Like it's so hard to explain how that's possible, but I just knew this. So I run outside, and when I run outside, I'm there's like trees out there, so I'm trying to run past the trees and look up, and as I'm approaching the clearage in the sky so I can see beyond the trees, I hear a humming, and it's like a very bassy, like vroom, vroom, vroom. And as I'm hearing those, like that bass in the vroom, it's like the electricity in my body is like zoom, up and down my spine, and but more than that, on my skin. And but it was euphoric. It was super pleasant. It was joyous. It was amazing. And so I'm running, and I get to the clearage, and when I can look into the sky, I just see this like a hexagonal craft that had lights around the edges and a perfectly square white light fixture in the center. And it's low, like it's right above the trees. If I threw a rock, I would have hit it. And this thing, like, it wasn't like this kind of like strange UFO in the sense where it looked metal, right? It looked like a physical metal UFO, almost saucer-like, except it was the shape of a hexagon with rounded edges and flattened, like a hexagonal pancake that was a dark, not black, but very dark gray metal. And I was following it, and I had to run down these stairs and into my driveway, and I'm like following it, and it's just going very slowly in, right above me. Maybe it's 80 feet in the air, 60 feet in the air or so. And I'm like freaking out at this point, because it's so in your face and so real. And as I'm getting towards the end of the driveway, it disappears, and simultaneously, like not a second past, is 1,000 feet away above this man-made lake. And when it disappeared to that location, I can see that there's other crafts there. So there were 3 of them, and they look identical to that one. And they're just hanging out in the sky and kind of moving like in different directions. And they have the lights going around them. And now I'm freaking out. And now I'm questioning my reality. I'm like, oh my, did I hit my head so hard in that accident that I'm just imagining all this shit? Because this is like too much. This is like, I'm thinking like disclosures happening right now. The aliens are here and whatever. Again, this is very hard to condense into a small story, because again, when I got the telepathic lock on and our consciousnesses are like merged or whatever. I got this download, from these entities, these non-human intelligence, allegedly. And I don't know if it's a deception, if they're manipulating me or lying to me, or if it's a genuine straight message, exactly how they're communicating it. It felt so real. So I'm going to say, in my heart of hearts, it felt like everything was as genuine as can be. And that this way of communication was just way over the top. It was way more transparent than any kind of verbal dialogue. It was incredible, and like the most efficient way to communicate ever, like in this reality. And these entities were, again, and again, this could be a deception or manipulation, or maybe I'm just interpreting it wrong, right? I want to keep all these possibilities open, that maybe I'm interpreting it this way and the entities didn't mean it that way. Or maybe even the entities are communicating it this way just because they think that's the limit of what I can understand. And maybe there's more to it and I just am not able to understand it, right? At least at that time, or even in this form. I don't know. But these entities communicated that they were somehow related to us, and that they're here to help, I guess you can say, if that makes sense. And they want people to know that they're here. And I was just kind of blown away by all that. And again, because this is happening, all this download is happening from the second that I made the connection with them, or they made the connection with me. As all this other stuff is going on, it's all happening simultaneously, right? So it's so hard to try to explain this. But so I'm at the point where I'm like questioning my entire reality at this point. Like, is this happening, or did I just hit my head so hard in that accident? So I run to my house, and there's two of my family members there. And I said, guys, come outside. And I said, why? I said, they're here. They said, who's here? I said, just come outside. So my family members come outside, and sure enough, they see all these crafts there, the three crafts moving around with the lights and everything. And I'm thinking, like, this is it. Like, the world is going to know about UFOs and these entities. Which at this point, I'm thinking in my head, like, I'm not even questioning the idea that they're probably extraterrestrials or something. But even what I forgot to mention before is that when I got the download thing and that whole thing started in my mind, it was like an overlay, because my eyes were open and I'm looking in my room before I ran outside, but there was an overlay and I could see these entities. They projected the image, and it's just like the typical Nordics, right? Like a male and female and these like spacesuit kind of things, these tight like things that you would see, like a grayish blue tight spacesuit spandex thing, blonde hair, blue eyes, pretty much, right? I got that image in my mind when they were communicating with me. And I don't know if that's metaphoric or symbolic, or they thought that I could relate to that image or what, but that was what I saw. So I'm thinking, like, this is disclosure happening. And this whole thing where we're watching these crafts over this man-made lake across the street is happening for maybe 20 minutes. And I'm just like, still this whole time, I'm like, I don't want to say in a state of shock, but I was like super excited. And I still, like, I'm trying to come to grips with what is going on. And the way the whole kind of like thing ended, this event ended, is that there's two of them left. There's two of them, and they're coming towards each other like this, and they're coming towards each other, and their lights are spinning around like this, and they're like coming like this, and they're about to crash. In my mind, I'm thinking, holy shit, they're going to crash. And as soon as I thought that, and as soon as they made contact, they just both disappeared, and that was it. And it was like, okay, the event's over. And I try to explain, like, that was the end of those three or four sequences of that whole kind of series of events was all connected, right? But that's how that ended. And of course, my mind was blown. And I had the realization at that point that, people, I could go and tell people about this experience, and that's great. but I just knew that people wouldn't like get it, right? Like it's not going to hit you the same way unless you have the experience. And so after that series of experience, again, because I had experiences when I was younger, not just with non-human intelligence, but with out-of-body experiences and psychic phenomena and what have all these things, right? But that happened again when I was 20 in 2007. And it was at that was the series of events that just pushed me over the edge, right? Like where I was just like completely motivated and involved to the point where like I had to be part of this process um, of trying to get the word out on this and becoming a serious researcher and like dedicating my life in part to this work. And shortly after, that's kind of where I found Dr. Stephen Greer and CE5, and that's a whole story from there. But the reason I became so involved with CE5, I started the first CE5 social media groups back in 2008, 2009, called the CE5 Initiative. The CE5 Initiative, that name was dubbed by Stephen Greer, but at that time I was very kind of taken by Stephen Greer's message and his information. And I was very kind of pro Stephen Greer, pro CSETI, the Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and CE5 and the CE5 protocols. And I got very involved in working with CE5 field working groups and going out and, over the course of many years, going out with hundreds and hundreds of different field workers, doing CE5 pretty much daily for many years, hours a day of meditation and what have you. So like you can say all that like accelerated my meditative and if you want to say spiritual or metaphysical study and practice. And again, I went on to have hundreds, if not thousands, of CE5 type experiences after that over the course of time from 2007 to the present.
And this guy has asked this question a few times. Did you have any time dilation or loss during the experience?
I really don't recall. I didn't. Not that it wasn't like I had some kind of experience and then I'm like, oh my God, it's 3 or 4 hours later. Not that I recall. I don't think so. I mean, not to my knowledge.
And if as fast as you can answer this, I guess, because it's kind of, I know you've done a lot of research into starfish prime, and some of your subjects have given you better answers than others. But I've always been fascinated by this, the blowing up of the nuclear bomb in space that some people say was really done for other reasons than just a test, which seems like a really stupid idea.
So, Tom DeLonge is the one who put that on my radar, and I worked, through my own networks, right? I've spoken to different people in the Invisible College about it, and you got to remember, yeah, Tom's advisors, right? It leaked out on WikiLeaks they're real deal. Could they be misleading him in some cases? Maybe, I don't know, but a lot of them seem to be pro disclosure. Could they have alternate agendas? Maybe. Again, there's a lot of things you have to put into question, but just certain things I'll say, like Starfish Prime, there was a high altitude nuclear detonation. Did they do that just to take down UFOs? Probably not. I mean, they were, but was that like a submission once that they knew that that test was going to happen? Probably. Right. So I do think that Starfish Prime was an actual event that did take down a UFO, and Tom and again, probably his advisors who told him is that like whatever came down in Roswell was that, right? We hear the story about that. There's the entities that kind of resemble the Greys or something similar to that, right? small entities, big head, big eyes, long fingers, that thing. But what a lot of people don't realize, what Tom says, is that in Starfish Prime, something else came down. So that's a detail that I've not gotten the answer to, but I think that Tom is dead on with that. And I think that event did happen. I did think, and when I asked Lou about, EMPs and nuclear detonation, being able to take down UFOs, he basically explained the process of why it takes them down, right? They generate their own space-time bubble, and a massive EMP, especially from a nuke, and probably why we've been arming ourselves with nukes ever since, is because they can take these things down and everybody knows it. It's a very dangerous game, right? It's questionable, but
Is that why they're so interested in our nukes?
I'd say that's probably one reason. Another reason could be if let's say that you have a whole population of non-human intelligence, right? Maybe some of them are extraterrestrial. Okay. Maybe they are. Maybe some of them are future time travelers. Maybe some of them are crypto-terrestrials and ultra-terrestrials. So in the extraterrestrial thing, like, wow, they have a weapon that can kind of mess with us. Let's keep an eye on that. If they're future humans, right? Or even if a small set of these UFOs are future humans, they don't want us to mess ourselves up, right? Or even if there's benevolent extraterrestrials, they don't want us to mess ourselves up either, right? But maybe some not so friendly extraterrestrials or non-human intelligence might say, hey, we better watch out. These guys can actually defend themselves against us if we're trying to manipulate them, which that's a whole nother discussion. But crypto-terrestrials, let's say that there's another non-human intelligence that lives under the ocean, right? And we just haven't been able to detect them. But they're another non-human intelligence that somehow, whether in our current dimension or they're phased in a different dimension but still present, but they're non-human intelligence and they're observing us and interacting with us in different ways, but they live on the planet, we could mess them up, right? And with the nuclear potentials. So maybe they're concerned for not even us, but themselves or even the planet, because if we mess up this planet, that kind of interferes with their ability to survive as well. So there's so many different possibilities to why UFOs would be interested in nuclear capabilities.
Very good. Well, there's a lot of questions that I didn't get to today, so hopefully we could have you on again sometime. But I appreciate the details about your own experience. And people can subscribe to you at Engaging the Phenomenon. Where else can they follow you?
So I'm on X or Twitter as Engaging the Phenomenon. The podcast is on Spotify mostly. I know Apple's having issues, and I've tried to fix that, and it's huge back and forth. Instagram, but mostly X and YouTube. And I have information in there where you guys can reach out to me if you'd like to make suggestions, if you want to see me interview anybody, or if you have any questions that maybe I can answer or share insight into, I'm happy to do that.
And this is the last thing just to throw out there. You know Davis from the Wilson Davis memo, right?
I do. I've spoken with him.
Do you know him?
I just reached out to him and I got lucky, but it's also that we have, it's hard to explain this. I became friendly with different people in the Invisible College for whatever reason. I would reach out to them and talk with them, and some of them became, I don't know, colleagues, right? So that kind of gave me like, okay, well, this person knows this person, so he's okay to talk to, right? So I've formed communications or relationships to some extent with people in the Invisible College. And I know that's a little worrisome to some people, say, oh, they're just disinforming you and whatever. Well, I'm not naive to the idea that they're not going to give me the full truth, or they're just going to tell me what they want me to know. But I ended up speaking to Eric because I knew Hal, because I knew Lou, because I knew Gary, because I knew Jacques. And, I wouldn't say we're all friends, right? But we communicate and they have an understanding. We have an understanding that I'm not going to go blurt out everything that they tell me, because that's not going to be helpful anyways, because a lot of these things they're trying to verify. So it just so happens that I've spoken to different individuals, and we, we're all right talking to each other.
And I don't think you can talk about it yet, but you're also going to be on a new television show coming out. Just so
well,
the
no,
fans.
I can talk about it. So the Cosmosis docuseries came out, and Cosmosis, I really appreciate. It's available on Apple TV and Amazon and YouTube. And Cosmosis is not for the faint of heart. It's the deep end of the pool. It's going to tell you, it's not just about these, UFOs and there's some kind of aliens up there. There's way more going on, and it has to do with human potential. It has to do with anomalous experiences, who we are as people, and what does that mean in our relation to the rest of the universe. So that's really deep shit. And that's Cosmosis, UFOs and a New Reality. And I was also featured in a series that just came out today on National Geographic, Hulu, and Disney. And that one's called UFOs Investigating the Unknown Season 2. And I'm only in a few minutes in the later episodes that deal with experiencers, which is going to be episodes 4 and 5. But I am going to be having Leslie Kane, who is a major consultant for that National Geographic project. I'm going to be having her on next week to discuss the show as well.
Please ask her about this upcoming imminent event that she's been speculating about.
Right. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm happy to come back on anytime. And if you want, we can do a longer session when we have time, because it's great shooting the shit with you, if I could say that, right?
Very good. Well, I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much. And, thanks for what you're doing. Cause I even saw like one of your interviews with Linda Moulton Howe way before I think you saw any of my stuff. Linda Moulton Howe was talking about Stephen Greer. That was great. But,
apparently I didn't know at the time, but I guess they dated or something for a while, right?
You'd be surprised at all the very strange relationships in the world of UFOs, like Linda Moulton Howe and Robert Bigelow. And it's not for me to talk about all that stuff, but there's a whole history of that. Somebody should write like a UFO gossip book that talks about all that stuff. They'd be surprised at all the crazy shit there is. But UFOs are real, right? As somebody who keeps commenting every video I upload on my channel, there's a guy, and he always drops a comment that says, "We have bodies, y'all." So I'm going to go ahead and say what that fan or follower of Engaging the Phenomenon says. UFOs are real. I think, pretty much everything David Grush, I don't want to say everything, but the what they call the core story, right? There's a non-human intelligence that's interacting with humanity, that's been interacting with humanity. And even Carl Nell said this, look up Carl Nell. This guy is like, if there was a guy on the program, on the UFO crash retrieval program, I'd be like, wow, this guy's like a prime candidate. So I think that he's somebody who's actually read in and can't say it yet. I think he's probably a firsthand witness. But you have Carl Nell and David Grush, and they've come forward, Lou Elizondo, Colin Kelleher, all those people, right? This stuff is real, right? And the UFO part is just the beginning. The UFO part is just the gateway drug. It's just the stepping stone. I call UFOs the bridge between physics and metaphysics, because you have these here physical objects that we can measure with materialism, but they're demonstrating metaphysical feats that not only tell us so much about the reality and what we don't know about reality, but ourselves, and that we have these capabilities as well.